This is Will Sanchez. My special guest tonight is Mark Heller. He's an athlete with the Greater New York Running Club, coached by the great Robert Glover. Mark probably has done more New York Road Runner races in the past 25 years than anyone else. So please welcome Mark Heller to the show.
Thanks, Will. Pleasure to be here.
Mark, as you know, I'd like to start by introducing the audience. Well, where were you born? What schools did you go to? A little bit about your family.
Okay. Well, I was born in Bergen County, New Jersey, Teaneck, that is, Holy Name Hospital. Grew up in a small town called Oradell, not too far from here, about 15 miles to speak. And grew up with 7 brothers and sisters and had a nice childhood growing up.
When did you start your athletic career?
I started wrestling at a very early age. I was about 8 years old, and I started in the first midget wrestling program that was starting in the township of Oradell and River Edge, and this was a pilot program at the time.
Now, this was part of a school program?
Part of a recreation township / school, and it was being done at the local junior and senior high schools with the help of the junior and senior teams there.
Well, that's a very young age to be tackling people. What attracted you to wrestling?
It's a good question, Will. I think what it was the individual competition. I had been to a couple of the wrestling matches and sat in the stands watching the older varsity wrestling guys, and it seemed like it would be something worthwhile to start and get interested in.
Okay, obviously you liked it because you kept on. Does this go through your teen years as well?
It did. I continued on through junior high school, college, and was a junior college All-American, actually. And it was very, very competitive, and it's not a sport for everyone, so to speak. A lot of discipline and time to be put in, but as in most individual sports.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is a one-on-one thing. It's not a group thing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What college did you go to?
I started at a school in South Florida called Broward Junior College, and they had a terrific athletic program. It was a last-minute decision. I had really was going to wait a while, as in a year or two before I stepped into school at the time. But a buddy of mine was going, and he was going on a wrestling scholarship there. So I decided to tag along, and they ended up giving me a scholarship, and it ended up to be just a wonderful experience for wrestling. And I really enjoyed the competition and the camaraderie that it offered, and I was fortunate in that for going to a junior college, we would compete against Division 1, 2, and 3 schools. As you know, during spring break, South Florida particularly, during those years, the colleges would come down, and we would end up wrestling 25 or 30 matches in a very short period of time. So it was quite something, and it was the competition was there, and I ended up, I think at the time we had 2 of us that made it to the Sunshine Open, which was a very big tournament during the holidays down there and so forth.
How did you learn about those things, about taking care of yourself nutritionally and physically?
A lot of it was learn as you go, and you knew you had to train, but you're 18 years old and you're on your own, and food is not necessarily easy to come by, nutritious food. So you do really the best you can. I remember in those years doing the best I could. Yeah. And as far as that, I mean, the mainstays of water and protein, yes, but there were probably a lot of things that found their way in that didn't belong there, so to speak.
Well, we're talking about 30 years ago or so, 35?
We're talking about 30 years ago.
Okay, and the sports world in terms of nutrition was very, very, I don't think it even existed. So there probably weren't any books you could go to what to eat. That's a more recent phenomenon. But let's jump ahead. When did you start another sport? Was it running?
The running I actually started as a sophomore in high school, and I had decided that, with the wrestling, that it made sense to try and run on the cross-country team, which was the season before wrestling started. So wrestling would start in November. So coming to school in August, September, I would put the running sneakers on and try to be a cross-country runner. And I soon found that I loved the sport. And it was really, what propelled me into wrestling season and going into the season in some kind of conditioning with some kind of condition made sense to me.
So you use running more as a course training for wrestling?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, was that something your coaches encouraged you to do?
Well, I think the coaches were actually a little upset with me at the time. That is, the football coaches wanted me to play football, and I think that the wrestling coaches were satisfied and the running coaches were satisfied. But I just found that I had a lot of pleasure out of, competing with the cross country. It was...
This is sophomore in high school or in college?
High school. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I'm attending Riverdale Regional High School, which is in Oradell, New Jersey. After that, I went on. I took a year off and went on to Hunter College in New York City, and really had moved on from wrestling and had been, quite frankly, started running seriously, on my own and entering races and, really enjoying the running in New York City.
What year was that when you were running in New York?
I want to say that 1983, 84, during that period of time, 83, 84, and 85 were my beginning years, post high school and college of running.
At that time, were you at a team or how did you manage your running? Because you said it was serious at this point.
I was fortunate enough that I met a lawyer in New York City, a wonderful guy by the name of Michael Frankfurt, who was a competitive runner with the Milrose team, local Milrose team, and he invited me on the team. And I thought that this was a good move to get some structure into my program, and to meet some people and really learn about racing and recovering and Central Park and how to structure a program that made sense. So that's what I did. I joined the Milrose team.
Milrose, and they're still around today.
Yes, they're one of the long-lasting running clubs, organizations that is still around, and they're terrific. They're just a terrific bunch of young, old, and middle-aged, and old.
Right.
Milrose is based out of Manhattan, and they compete in all the Central Park races and some of the relays, and have a terrific following. Very loyal following.
Okay. Well, at some point you got into physical training. Personal training. How did that develop for you?
Well, I had started off with, I was an account executive in the advertising world, and had been doing that for a number of years, and I was looking for a little bit of a change, and we handle a lot of health and beauty. So I slowly found myself getting into the personal training business, and really, going and getting educated in the field. And that's how it started. It just started. It was a very, gradual, natural process for me, and I enjoyed the fact that I could develop my clientele and train athletes and non-athletes, and really, work on my own clock, so to speak.
So that's more like an independent contractor relationship.
It is. It is. I'm fortunate enough in that I have the best of both worlds in my work life. I work with a great company by the name of Equinox, as you know, and
I'm a member.
yeah. So I have that, and then I also work at a couple foundations in the city and corporations that I have contracts with that I, service their employees and the officers of the company and so forth. And so it's really having the best of both worlds in that I'm independent in one sense, and then I have the structure of a company on the other hand.
Well, that's terrific, and you're physically active year-round because of the running, the work. So that's terrific. But when did you start doing long-distance running? I
started long-distance running about a year after I joined the Milrose team. I was bugged by my mentor to try the New York City Marathon out, and trained for it, run it, enjoy it, and with the goal that we were going to qualify for Boston, for the Boston Marathon, and it all sounded great. It just seemed like a very natural transition, and I seemed more geared towards doing better at the longer races. My times reflected such that I could kind of hold a little bit of speed I had for a long period of time. The first New York Marathon I did was in 1984, Will. No lottery. What you did do, and I may not be exact in the processes here, but what happened was you filled out an application and you, quote unquote, you ran to the post office to get your application in by a certain time and date, and wait for a response, and hopefully you got in. And
but what was the criteria? Did you be a member of Roadrunners?
Well, you had to be a member of the Roadrunners. You had to be a member, and you had to be satisfied that you were in good working order and that everything was working, and sign on the dotted line, pay the entry fee, and.
But we have a chart here. Is this your first New York City Marathon?
That is my first New York City Marathon, Will. This was October, Will, and it was 93 degrees. They ran out of water, and here we were, coming down Central Park South, and it's October, 93 degrees, and guys were, legitimate runners were on the side of the road, just kind of saying, hey, it's got to be an easy way to do this, and it was very memorable, a lot of fun, and 2:50:52. My goal that day was to run 2:50 to qualify for Boston. So what happens is I get back and I wasn't terribly disappointed. I took the weather into consideration and decided to write a letter to the BAA explaining, the circumstances of the race and would they be willing to, waive off the 52 seconds. Yes. And
I wonder if that inspired them, because shortly thereafter they allowed that 59-second grace period. So if the cutoff was 2:50 and you went up to 2:50:59, they would let you go into Boston without writing a letter.
My grassroots approach is that it should remain it's the only qualifying marathon where an amateur runner goes out and qualifies via a time that they're running from another marathon to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And, you have two schools now. One that says the standards should be higher.
Because they did change it, because it's no longer 2:50 for that age group. I think you said it's now 3:10.
Right. They've changed the standards. They've added 15, 20 minutes to the age groups, and it's like I say, some people are all for it, others are not. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I'm a little more realistic, I guess, comes with age, that exposing people to a great race, amateur runners, is wonderful, and that's what it's about, you know.
But they changed it again. I think they lowered it by 5 minutes, and they got rid of the 59-second grace period. So if the standard used to be 3:10, it's now 3:05, and if you did 3:05:52, you're out of luck this time around. So it does change over time.
I've run the actual Boston Marathon 10 times, and I always seem to get up for the race and have a pretty good race in Boston. The crowd is, you know, just wonderful. They're great sports people. The town is on fire, and there's a certain buzz, like we have our buzz on Marathon Day and the day before. They have their own. My PR or personal best in the marathon is in Boston.
Which is a very, very difficult marathon to do a personal best.
It is. It is very tough. That course is very tough. As you know, there's a lot of downhill running, which if you haven't practiced downhill running can be very debilitating. But I just remember going through the race that day and it being very easy, and I had extra motivation. My 80-year-old grandfather was there with my dad, and both of them are from Boston, and my uncle as well. And I just, like, you know, you start that race, and that particular day it was 60 degrees, 65, and it just flowed.
Good weather, yes.
Good weather.
That's excellent.
I do remember one race, though, that was a half marathon in 05 or 06, and any runner who ran in that race, who was running during those years, or is running still today, it was 90 degrees outside, and maybe 95% humidity, and here we are in the Manhattan Half, inside Central Park, 2 loops and some change, and I just remember getting to about a third of the way through, and just the air being that thick, and thinking to myself, this is going to be a long, long day at the office. It's going to be tough trekking. And I had some fans there who were, my buddies were there, supposed to root me on at 15K, and they even disappeared. But
it was too hot for them.
Too hot for them. But roll the clock ahead, and I got through the race, and every step was just like you were slugging it out, and there was no rhythm to the race, and just finishing was an accomplishment. I remember thinking, just got to get through this race. It's not going to be pretty. And I was reading afterwards that there was 25 or 30% dropout that day, and
and that was for a half.
That was for a half. But that was something.
Interesting. You called it the Manhattan Half, but I think you started running. It used to be called the Hispanic race.
Yes,
like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is absolutely correct. And it was that was one of the biggest races during my initial years that we would run in August. It was called the Hispanic Half, and you had every club there, and they were very, very competitive. And we would. It was the first time I had ever, my first time I'd ever really, dropped below 125 at the time. I really got fixated on, kind of getting the running to going faster and bringing my times down to some competitive times there. But it was always a lot of fun, that race, But I remember you talk about names that from the past, the reversible 7. It was one that I loved that they no longer have.
Well, what's the reversible 7?
The reversible 7 was a 3.5 mile out and back kind of like a figure 8 out and back that was happening on the east side, and it was just this wonderful race that it attacked the northern hills, and you'd have as far as the numbers, you wouldn't get 3,000 people at the race. You might get 1,500 that day for the reversible 7. So it was a kind of a perfect size race in the big city, so to speak.
You mentioned 1,500. It is amazing. This is Central Park, and every race that I've done in Central Park is always 3,000 to 5,000 runners. It's just amazing venue for Central Park.
Yes, I will say that there's no place like it, and the beauty of it is that, you know, here we have the New York Roadrunners Club, who puts on, I believe, 40 to 45 races a year in the most fabulous venue in the world, and we're really spoiled.
We are.
As far as I'm concerned. I did get into swimming. I got into swimming. It's kind of had two parts. One, I knew this guy, Will Sanchez, that suggested I give swimming a try as a secondary sport. And he had mentioned a couple of local coaches, one being Doug Stern. And, I would listen, but I wouldn't settle in on it. I wouldn't go down and sign on the dotted line and start swimming. And God knows you tried to get me in there. And so... what happens is I unfortunately come down with an injury to my right knee, a very serious injury that was very debilitating, and I had a fracture, and they told me I would never run again. And
really?
Yes, and I had torn my meniscus and had unnecessary surgery, and then had to have the surgery redone, and the meniscus was torn the second time around, and I had a very bad fracture of the knee, medial aspect, the medial condyle was fractured. So I jumped in the water finally, and to, you might say, get my head out of running and try to heal. And in the process of doing so, I found the water to be just wonderful, highly therapeutic. I could train the various metabolic systems at a wonderful in a wonderful structured way. And
let's mention a wonderful organization that helped you. Red Tide, is it?
Yes. First and foremost, Red Tide is a master swimming team that's been around for over 20 years, and just fabulous. I don't know the adjective to describe how good they are, because they're that good. And the coaches really, hung in there with me, because I started. I was a real work in progress.
Well, speaking of hanging in, you're doing an interesting charity work coming up. You got into I believe, the New York City Tri?
Yes, this is the second time around this year with the Nautica New York City Triathlon.
So let's take a look at it, and then we'll comment after it's done.
Pay attention, because you should be, because what you're about to hear is very important.
So important. It can be the difference between life
And death.
So just sit back, relax, but stay focused. Everybody knows it's the holiday season, and that means it's the season for giving.
I know what you're thinking.
Doing something nice for others and not expecting anything in return? Darn it. Actually, I hope you're not thinking that.
You can give all year long. And one charity that I personally would like to give to,
And that's the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. The Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation.
pulmonary fibrosis.
What is pulmonary fibrosis? It's a very serious lung disease, and so far, it's incurable.
A quick overview of pulmonary fibrosis is
That the lungs get thick and scarred, making it very hard to breathe, cutting off the oxygen in the bloodstream. It's heading to all major organs.
this doesn't lead to anything good, and the cause is unknown.
As I've said before, there is no cure. This is a hideous and very serious disease. My amazing aunt just this past summer passed away from pulmonary fibrosis. I stayed by her side 3 months before she passed away, as did the rest of our family. We got to see the worst of pulmonary fibrosis. And let me tell you, it's no walk in the park. No disease is. The thought kept crossing through my mind that Aunt Judy wasn't the only one going through this.
So I did a little research, and what I found out was shocking.
2/3 of those who are diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis pass away within the first 5 years. Pulmonary fibrosis is currently affecting 128,000 people in the United States.
And each year that number grows by 48,000.
But it also shrinks because 40,000 people lose their lives to pulmonary fibrosis. This is the same number as cancer.
There is no FDA-approved treatment for this.
And research funding is only getting $18 million a year, which is only a fraction compared to other disease research foundations.
Pulmonary fibrosis might not be as well known as breast cancer or AIDS, but it's still a growing problem that people really need to be aware of.
If it favors you, there'll be a cure. And people won't have to go through what my aunt had to fight through. One thing that gets me even to this day, she was on the brink of life and death, and she still cares enough to ask me how my grades are doing. If I were her, I would have only cared about helping myself. But no, Aunt Judy, she cared about people and found joy in helping them every day. Can you help another by donating and inevitably save a life? After all, it is the season of giving. I hope you join me in the fight against pulmonary fibrosis.
I hope you'll help me
In the fight to defeat pulmonary fibrosis. Don't let anyone have to go through what my aunt has gone through.
The Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation really caught my attention because of the severity of the disease. And the more I read, the more research that I read, and more people I listened to, it made sense to me to get involved. It's a very rare disease, and it's it's like any other disease, cancer. It's absolutely horrible. It's not a long-lived disease. The lungs are greatly compromised, and people struggle with it.
I did a little research, and it turns out that Evel Knievel died from it. He was the famous, of course, stunt driver. Everybody thought he was going to be killed by a crash, but he died from this horrible pulmonary fibrosis disease.
Yes, I was reading about that and actually listening to his daughter go on about that, and as she put, if it gets people aware, of the disease and brings attention to it, it's gonna serve a great purpose.
Mark, well, thank you so much for introducing us to this charity, and we wish you all the success in fundraising for it, and a great time at the event. I think it's in August, right?
It's August 7th. It's in our backyard, and
Great.
Looking forward to it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for dropping in.
Thanks for having me, Will. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.